For about a decade, Gaslight Square offered St. Louisans a unique and magical entertainment destination. But the success of Gaslight Square was too good to be true. It may have been crime, the fear of crime, or just changing tastes that sealed Gaslight Square's fate. The last ember died in 1972 when O'Connell's Pub closed its doors. And for 30 years, Gaslight Square sat, vacant, decaying, and without a plan. Some people talked about saving the buildings and trying to revive Gaslight Square as an entertainment district. But those plans didn't go anywhere. Meanwhile, Gaslight Square sat in uncertainty, bricks falling from its facades. In the early 1960s, a local television program looked at the problems facing St. Louis.
There in the distance is downtown St. Louis. Here, where we stand, is the heart of the city. All around is destruction. Half-crumbled buildings, the shells of yesterday's long gone. In many of the once fashionable areas of old St. Louis, the creeping blight is making itself felt. These neighborhoods are teetering on the brink. Signs for sleeping rooms and furnished rooms advertise the fact.
But amidst all this decay and urban blight, the program showcased one shining example of revitalization.
Keystone of the Renaissance of the West End is Gaslight Square at Boyle and Olive. The street's beginning to take on the look of the fashionable 90s. Crowds are so thick on weekends it's almost impossible to find a parking place in the immediate area. Things of interest are the sidewalk artists making sketches to order and exhibits of oil paintings. St. Louisans are flocking to this new mecca of nightlife in ever-increasing numbers. St. Louis has been called the Dowager City, and perhaps with good reason. But the old lady seems to have lifted her skirts and is proving that she can still tap out a pretty good tune at the age of nearly 300 years.
Little did they know that this success story in Gaslight Square would last only a few more years. Gaslight Square was a meteor that rose in the mid-1950s and burned brightly for about 10 years. But by the late 60s, this shining star had lost its glow. The area sat idle and decaying for decades.
It was just the environment itself. It was such a casual, friendly, warm environment. You could park your car and just walk all over the place, and there were so many different types of venues.
You could hear great Dixieland music, go out the door, 2 doors down, and hear show tunes. Or 2 doors the other way and hear a folk singer.
Gaslight Square, what was it like? It was like if you were at the corner of Pendleton and Olive and you were going east to Vanderveer. It would take you 45 minutes to drive 2 blocks because people were like this in the street. You just couldn't come. It was just creeping along.
Started out basically Gaslight at the Black Horse, which is had the old English motif inside, and it was frequented by not only lots of college students but people from all walks of life.
It was eclectic. Virtually whatever somebody wanted was there on Gaslight Square.
You had that variety. You didn't have to just go to a jazz club or just a blues club. There were fine dining restaurants, and it was marvelous. I think the magic was how the people came together. how the musicians were more closer together.
It's interesting, over the last 30-odd years, since I'm the only public place that's still connected to it, the question of what happened or what it was like, believe me, I have been asked this question hundreds of times. Festive is a great word. People were happy, streets were crowded, especially in the summertime. The music, the food, everything about the street was a very healthy party.
On a Saturday evening, you knew when you saw a person walk into the area that they came out to have fun, to be entertained. There was no doubt.
There were 10,000 people, 20,000 people on a 2-block stretch. It was amazing.
We had memorable nights down there. And I tell you one thing I remember particularly. I sang calypso songs. Hey-oh, hey-oh. That was the big daylight come on, they want to go home. That was that kind of thing.
I remember going there in college. I guess it would have been 1964, 65. Going down there, and on a warm autumn or spring evening, it was absolutely packed with people. I think of O'Connell's, and on any given Friday night in O'Connell's, there might be business guys, students, professors. There was this weird Hells Angels guy who hung out there that had this helmet with hair on it, and it was very menacing looking, but really was sort of, tended toward the poetic.
Well, when we first opened up the red carpet, I have an uncle who at that time had a Rolls Royce. And he decided we were going to open the red carpet and drive up in a Rolls Royce. Turns out the Rolls Royce was like a 1933 or whatever it was, and we had to push it up the street. And here my grandmother was sitting in back like a dowager. And one of my uncles was sitting in the driver's seat with a cap on. And here were 6 of us pushing the Rolls Royce up the street. So, they were a great experience.
I worked there at my parents' nightclub 14, 15, 16 years old. And I can remember Saturday nights working, bussing tables, or hosting, and then in the evening staying at my brother's apartment upstairs. I'd look out the window and the clubs are just closing down, so you see all the club goers, the people dressed for clubbing, and they dressed beautiful, walking up and down the street, and at night Gaslight Square was like a fairyland of lights and colors and music. I've told friends it was a little difficult making the transition between working on Gaslight Square Friday and Saturday night as a busboy and then going to high school. On Monday morning, I was talking about things that the other kids didn't talk about. My mother used to say, when people say, "How can you let him work in a nightclub?" she'd say, "He's getting a good liberal education."
I think it was a cultural oasis in a city that was otherwise sort of devoid of acceptance of the creative, acceptance of the different. There was a sense of tribalism, a sense of togetherness, which I think still exists today with the people who lived there and hung out there. And again, it was the people who lived there who had a vested interest in the area that really gave it its character.
Freedom. And that's what Gaslight Square represented, different types of ways of living. There was an acceptance of individuality, unity but variety.
Although it was a lot of fun, there was some sort of civic purpose beyond just having fun. It was a place where all sorts of people came together. I mean, it drew from the county and from the West County and the South County and the Central West End, and it was just this great convergence of people. And it had meaning beyond just dancing and drinking and playing at night. There were conversations there that I think couldn't have been beat anywhere. Just brilliant people. It was magnetic. It was just simply magnetic for all sorts of smart, hip, interesting folks.
Smart, hip, and interesting. These are words you hear from many of the people who frequented Gaslight Square. They're also words that describe a few people who played a large role in making the magic of Gaslight Square happen. Jay and Fran Landesman owned the Crystal Palace, a cabaret and theater that was the center of culture in Gaslight Square.
It was a reflection of the incredible spirit of Jay and Fran Landesman and their daring in presenting things that were avant-garde. Not only plays and dramas and stuff like that, but performers.
Jay Landesman was a writer and publisher. In the late 1940s, he published a New York literary magazine that offered avant-garde perspectives and early missives from Beat Generation writers like Allen Ginsberg. His wife, Fran, was a singer and songwriter who would go on to create many jazz standards. Jay and his brother Fred opened the Crystal Palace because, as they said, there was nowhere to get a decent drink in this town. But the Crystal Palace offered much more than just a good drink. Jay Landesman had an uncanny ability to identify emerging talent. He booked performers like Barbra Streisand and Woody Allen, Phyllis Diller, the Smothers Brothers, while some of them were still virtual unknowns.
George Carlin and his partner at the time, Jack Burns, acts like that were just on their way to becoming huge. And that's what Jay and Fran did.
They were willing to take the risks to present them. It was just a matter of having those cultural antennae out all the time and listening for things and being one step ahead, spotting that this young woman, Barbra Streisand, was going to be a great star and bringing her in, the Smothers Brothers. And I think everybody looks back on that time and understands that something very unusual and very magical was happening in St. Louis.
People came from all over to see what the fuss was all about, and the locals will tell you, if you weren't there, there's no way to understand what it was like.
You could talk to Jeannie Trevor and you can talk to Peanuts Whalen, and it doesn't do any good. You just had to be there.
You aren't really able to explain what happened because I think it's ineffable and almost accidental. And we know that you cannot plan something like this to happen. For example, you see some of these casino builders trying their best to simulate something like Gaslight Square by having the gaslight and the cobblestone street effect and all that sort of thing. It just comes off as bogus. This in every way was authentic until it got unauthentic, until the go-go places came in, until the greedy people came in and destroyed it. And I would put the greedy people at the top of the list of the vandals of Gaslight Square. There was other stuff certainly that was going on. There was the perception of crime. Anything that happened in Gaslight Square got publicity, and if there was crime in Gaslight Square, it was going to get publicity, and it got maybe over-publicized.
And I think most of it was perception. I mean, there was, the break-ins of cars, things of that sort. I mean, that kind of minor street stuff did take place. But It wasn't really rampant, but I think that the conception of crime and that started to have its effect on people driving to the neighborhood.
Rumors just started flying rampantly, and I honestly don't. I was just startled as the rest of them. Maybe it was just the end of a era, personality-wise. Maybe someone else would know. I was just, my Camelot had ended, and I was hurt, and I was flabbergasted by the whole thing.
Crime became, quite prevalent there, during that time, and I think maybe the city fathers were ready to just close that down. Yeah.
The people haven't been paying their dues to the Gaslight Square Association, so my job was really to go and knock on doors to help collect the dues and to work out some problems. Like a couple times on my watch, the gas lights were turned off by the Clede Gas, and we had to go down to the Clede Gas and negotiate to get them turned back on. There's a certain fickleness among St. Louis nightclubbers. They'd really done Gaslight Square, and there were a few clubs left in the late 1960s, but there were even a couple of go-go joints that were there. So you could see it had really transitioned, and it was Gaslight Square as a product was well beyond its mature stage. It was really in its death stage. I sold out in September '65. In '64, I turned down $60,000, and in September '65, I sold it for $5,000. People were getting much frightened. They didn't want to travel downtown. Even traveling from West County to to Gaslight Square at Olive and Boyle became pretty much of a problem for a lot of people. A lot of the antique dealers either died off or they closed their shop. And when I was there, most of them had iron bars in front of their shops, and even at 10 or 11 in the morning, I'd have to knock on the door and say, "Hey, I'm Bob Rubright. I want to talk to you about this or that."
Well, the end was like somebody with some sort of horrible cancer that sort of went into remission, and I mean, never really went into remission, but it kind of just hung on and hung on and hung on, and Jack Parker hung on forever, and maintained this loyal following, and people still went down there, but eventually he was obliged to move, and everybody understood why.
Music was the heartbeat of Gaslight Square. All kinds of music, from Dixieland to jazz to show tunes to folk. And while many people think that the music of Gaslight Square is a mere memory, a whole new generation is about to be able to enjoy it. Dan Warner owns Webster Records in Webster Groves. A few years back, Dan started a new label designed to give a home to the music that has shaped St. Louis's history.
You know, it's so important to not forget where we come from as we go forward. And Gaslight Records is formed with that principle in mind, that mission, that we have to be able to appreciate these high points in music that have come from St. Louis. St. Louis has been a very important contributor to music in the world.
Until recently, Gaslight Records was missing only one important ingredient: the music of Gaslight Square. But that's about to change. Dan Warner is continuing the legacy of Norman Weinstraw, whose Norman Records label recorded many of the Gaslight greats.
Norman was a big-time recording company executive. He came back to St. Louis, he and his wife Pat, who was a delightful lady, and he started a company called Norman Distributing, which was a record distributor. Anyway, when the Square blossomed, Norman, who's always had great affection for local entertainers and musicians, decided that he would set aside an amount of money and kind of showcase them on recordings.
Fortunately for Gaslight Records, and for all of us, the master tapes from those sessions survived decades of storage.
We tracked down Norma, his daughter, and his son Bob, and his other daughter Mary, and we started putting together, assembling the masters from his record company. And I think these masters kind of got spread around, and it took us several years to pull the pieces together. In fact, just the other day, Marty Bronson, came up with a few more masters that were in his garage.
Warner has been sorting through those tracks to put together a collection of music that captures the spirit of Gaslight Square. The collection includes tracks by Singleton Palmer, whose roots go back to the riverboat days. Russ David, one of the most respected pianists and bandleaders in St. Louis.
When the evening sun goes down,
Seal Clayton, a mainstay at Mr. D's and the Merry-Go-Round.
Old Man River,
The sultry Clea Bradford, who regularly played at the Dark Side.
Old Man River,
Muggsy Sprecher, the Dixieland jazz man who livened up the crowd at Bustles and Bows.
heart of my heart, how of that melody.
Davy Bold, a popular comedian and entertainer at the Georgian, and one of the original performers on the Square. Quartet Très Bien, the adventuresome and creative mainstay of the Dark Side.
Magic is the moonlight.
Marty Bronson, who owned the wildly popular Marty's.
As I see the moonlight shining in your eyes.
And the inimitable Jeannie Trevor, Gaslight Square's first lady of jazz.
Oh yeah, somebody is knocking at the door.
It wasn't easy to find them all, but for Dan Warner, it was a labor of love.
To me, the value is to maybe introduce somebody that didn't know what it was like to walk down Gaslight Square and hear this music coming out of these clubs. Maybe we're going to hopefully give somebody a chance to revisit that musically.
Of course, the revival of Gaslight Square music isn't limited to recordings. Here at Brandt's Cafe in the U-City Loop, you can hear Gaslight greats like Jeannie Trevor and May Wheeler. They're being booked regularly by owner Jay Brandt. That's right, the kid who used to bus tables at the red carpet in Gaslight Square.
This started about a year ago. We did a Gaslight Square Remembered Night. May Wheeler showed up, and Jeannie Trevor, and Peanuts Whalum, and Prentice Minner, and Denise Times, and May Wheeler put it best. A couple days later, I was talking to her, and she said, "Honey, what happened was magic. It may never happen again." The energy from those musicians. Well, since then, May Wheeler now comes in twice a month. Jeannie Trevor comes in once a month. Peanuts comes in every now and then.
Youngsters are bringing that about. Thank God they're listening. A lot of youngsters are listening to Frank Sinatra and Bobby Darin. They are really listening.
It's been a remarkable journey for Gaslight Square. From entertainment mecca to blighted and decaying to gloriously reborn. It's a testament to the city's ability to rebuild itself, and a very good omen for a city that has seen its share of challenges in recent decades.